Director at ClearPath. I want to welcome all of you that are here in the room and tuning in from the East and West Coast this evening. I want to welcome everyone on behalf of our fantastic partners. Again, I'm with ClearPath. Our partners in this event are Pillsbury, USNC, Third Way, Clean Air Task Force, the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, TerraPraxis, and the U.S. Nuclear Infrastructure Council. And we're very excited about a discussion around de-risking advanced nuclear technology globally as a climate solution. I'll just give one quick reflection, which is that I think there's been an extraordinary change, as many of us in the nuclear space have noted, in the acceptance of nuclear as a decarbonizing solution in forums like the COP. This is something that used to be barely on the agenda, and it has now become commonplace. There were multiple events within the Blue Zone, dozens of events amongst civil society and the outside, literally hundreds of folks here from civil society, global nuclear policymakers, industry representatives, advocates, analysts, activists. And so it's really exciting to see the change in the increased acceptance of the technology in the space. I think it's also terrific to see the continued deep engagement from our perspective of the U.S. administration in this. Obviously, the previous administration had really led with nuclear as a climate solution, and it's been terrific to see the continued emphasis on that in this administration. So I want to thank you very much and recognize that Assistant Secretary for International Affairs, Andrew Light, is here with us this evening, and I think we'll soon be joined by the Deputy Secretary as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lindsey Walter from Third Way for a quick pre-recorded message about what is advanced nuclear and why this is so important as a climate solution. So I think we'll go now to the message from Lindsey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lindsey Walter, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Climate and Energy Program at Third Way, a think tank focused on using every clean energy tool to get the US and the world to net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. We're at a turning point, not only in our efforts to address climate change, but also in our pursuit of technological innovation in the 21st century. One of the many reasons Third Way is here at COP26 is to reiterate the importance of investing in advanced nuclear to reduce carbon emissions, support a reliable net zero electric grid, and spur economic growth and job creation around the world. Thankfully, there's already a broad and growing consensus that nuclear power will play a pivotal role in shaping our net zero economy. Several countries are pushing forward bold programs to develop, demonstrate, deploy, and commercialize advanced reactors. In the United States, the Department of Energy is engaged in a public-private partnership to demonstrate 2 advanced reactors in the next 7 years, with early-stage investment in 5 additional technologies that can lead to demonstration in the early 30s. Just last week, US company NuScale unveiled a new advanced reactor under development with Nuclear Electrica in Romania. As we learned, NuScale will be replacing 4.5 gigawatts of coal generation with 5 new advanced modular plants, creating nearly 6,000 construction jobs, over 23,000 manufacturing jobs, and eliminating 45 million tons of CO2 per year. We're also seeing movement on nuclear right here in the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Johnson has pledged to expand the UK's use of nuclear energy in order to reach 100% clean electricity by 2035. And he's committed to building as many as 16 new small modular reactors or advanced modular reactors by 2035. And in France, President Macron has pledged to invest 1.1 billion in nuclear power by 2030 in an effort to expand France's carbon-free power production and bolster France's hydrogen and clean energy capacity. Global leaders are starting to recognize the significant role nuclear could play as a reliable, dispatchable complement to renewables like wind and solar. Leaders are also identifying advanced nuclear as an emerging industry that will bring significant economic growth to countries around the world. Finally, nuclear is often included in conversations around industrial decarbonization, as it could play a helpful role in curbing emissions from hard-to-abate sectors like aluminum and steel. What was once regarded as a pipe dream is now becoming a real climate solution with tangible economic and industrial benefits. So as we plan the road ahead and hunker down to meet our climate targets, how can we work together to accelerate the deployment of advanced technologies and de-risk the deployment of advanced nuclear? We're honored to be here today alongside a group of remarkable energy and environmental NGOs, industry and trade organizations that are forging the path forward for advanced nuclear energy. Thank you to all of our partner organizations for making this event possible, and I really look forward to hearing from our speakers as the conversation unfolds.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsey. I now have the pleasure for the second time this week to be introducing Kristy Goken, who's going to moderate our next discussion. For those of you who don't already know the amazing Kristy Goken, she's the managing director and founder of TerraPraxis, as well as the managing director of Lucid Catalyst. She's a longtime analyst, activist, and deep policy thinker for nuclear energy globally. She was previously an advisor at 10 Downing Street, which I'm told is a big deal in this country. In the country to the south. There's mixed feelings about it in this specific country. And she was very kind to come and speak to the delegation of U.S. conservative policymakers who also came to the COP in this past week. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristy to kick off our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you. It's my favorite thing to be introduced by Rich, so I just follow him around looking for speaking opportunities. Thank you so much, everybody. We are going to have a really interesting and exciting conversation. Like, I've been at COP now for about 10 days, and I'm almost losing track of the number of announcements that we've seen on nuclear innovation. The UK government even decided that it was feeling a bit left out and made a major announcement today to support Rolls-Royce and the UK SMR consortium to build 16 small modular reactors, as Lindsey was saying a moment ago. And that really is a big deal because, of course, as we know, SMRs have a very different financing model. They have a very different delivery model, factory-made, manufactured products that can be easily assembled on site. Very, very different from the Olympic scale 10-year-long construction that we see with traditional approaches to light water reactors. And so in terms of being able to site these projects more easily, finance them more easily, deliver them at scale, really cost effectively, it's really meaningful for our net zero transition. And importantly, it will help to build our supply chain for additional technologies that are also coming down the track. So it's my absolute honor now to invite three very distinguished speakers. So would you each like to come up to the front? So Sama Bilbawi-Leon, who's Director General of World Nuclear Association, John Gorman, who's the president of the Canadian Nuclear Association, and Jeff Merrifield, who is a partner at the Pillsbury law firm and former NRC commissioner. So thank you all. We're going to have a bit of a rapid fire round. I'll just come sit. Is this on? Yes. So what I'd love to do is invite each of you to just give us your perspective on what's happening right now with advanced nuclear, with SMRs, maybe starting, Sama, with the global perspective, and then inviting John and Jeff to offer their perspectives from Canada and the US.
Well, thank you, Kristy, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. No, so I think that we started, all of us are quite optimistic of what we are seeing here at COP. And as you heard, there is certainly a lot more interest in nuclear energy as an opportunity to do this massive, fast, and round-the-clock decarbonization. So certainly advanced reactors as a complement or in addition to what we are seeing for the traditional large reactors is something that we are seeing many places in the world. I will not talk about Canada since we have somebody that will give us all the big picture, or the US. But no, certainly, as we've heard, there is a lot of interest in Europe. Eastern European countries are looking very much into large, small, and medium-sized reactors. We are seeing the same thing in the UK and in France. And then if we are looking further away, certainly You have seen that both in Russia and in China, they are doing quite a lot of work developing these reactors. You, of course, are aware that currently some of the first small modular reactors are already operating in the Pevek region in northeast Russia, producing electricity and heat, and they've been doing so for a couple of years now. So that is already a proven fact. And then we have a lot of development also happening in China. You are familiar with not only the reactors that are actually currently in the final stages of commissioning, which are high temperature, small high temperature gas-cooled reactors that are going to bring some of these opportunities that we are discussing, that going beyond electricity and actually providing this low carbon heat for hydrogen production, district heating, industrial applications, etc., etc. So yeah, so we see a lot of excitement, and as Kristy said, this brings opportunities, a new business model that is going to perhaps be more affordable for some countries, and this is particularly important when we are looking at Africa. Africa, they do need a lot of energy, but unfortunately they don't have a lot of financial opportunities. So in this sense, perhaps starting with some of these smaller reactor designs that are more affordable may also be something that they may be interested in. So I stop here because I know these guys will complement.
Sama, thanks. Thank you so much. And you're really sort of broadening out the value proposition for nuclear technologies. You know, obviously the low carbon electricity and at large scale or smaller scale is incredibly valuable. But for our larger decarbonization challenge, for the other 80% of energy that we use, nuclear technologies are incredibly useful for those non-power applications as well. And John, maybe you could tell us a bit about what's happening in Canada in that area as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Kristy. I'd be happy to speak about that. And I just, if I could at the beginning, just acknowledge Rich's comments. I was glad to hear your perspective in terms of how you see the changing perceptions about nuclear here at COP. This is my first COP. And just as a sort of side note of interest, I'm new to the nuclear industry, about 2.5 years. I spent more than 20 years in the renewables industry, particularly solar, as a developer, as an advocate, and working with the utilities in the IEA. And 2.5 years ago, even Rich, it was a bit of I had people who wouldn't speak to me, you know, from the renewables sector. And I'm proud to say that on October 13th, in the Canadian context, we launched something called the Electricity Alliance of Canada, which is a bringing together of the industry associations of wind, water, solar, marine renewables, and nuclear. So that changing perception, the obvious need to have vast amounts of clean electricity and heat in this instant is really beginning to permeate everywhere. So the Canadian context for small modular reactors, I think we have I would say an advantage nationally in terms of our level of organization. Although I would say that lately it seems like our financial support from the federal government is lagging behind some of these newer announcements. We have seen 3 technologies that have been funded by the federal government, and that's a positive thing. There's about an $11 billion fund now called the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is going to be announcing more funding shortly for some of the technologies. In Canada, we have 12 different technologies going through the review and licensing process right now, some of them very close to being confirmed. I'm looking over here at Wendy because USNC and Global First Power are winning that licensing battle and have made firm commitments with Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. I'd also say that Ontario Power Generation, which is our largest utility, has announced that it will be connecting its first 300 megawatt plant to the electricity grid in 2028. So we're going to be seeing other provinces that have signed on to this rolling out, for example, Saskatchewan, another province rolling out 4 or 5 of the same unit in lockstep with OPG. So we are moving along. We've got 4 provinces, the leaders of whom have signed an MOU for the deployment of these small modular reactors. And Kristy, I guess on the industrial side, I'll just say, you know, quickly, Canada, every nation has its own pathway, right, to decarbonization. Canada already has a clean electricity system, about 80% clean. we don't have that low-hanging fruit of phasing out, vast amounts of coal to hit our aggressive GHG targets. So we have to worry about our industrial and natural resource-based economy. It's oil and gas extraction, mining, steel, cement production, fertilizer, and natural resources. So in the Canadian context, we're looking to that high temperature heat to be able to decarbonize all of those sectors. That's where we're going to get what we need. And our research, and Kirsty's familiar with this, looking at the deployment of small modular reactors in that heavy industry sector shows some very remarkable things, about an 18% reduction in emissions from heavy industry as we head towards 2050, huge adoption of the technology, and interestingly, a contribution to our GDP, $5 billion per year to our GDP, as well as making it 5% cheaper for us to reach net zero 2050. So it's a big success story in the Canadian context.
Fantastic. Great work. Keep it up. I'm so glad. We're so lucky to have you, John. And congratulations on the alliance as well. I think that's really, really significant. And we really need to be thinking about this from a whole system perspective. So building these relationships is absolutely critical. So Jeff, I'd like to invite you now to sort of really give us a bit more an overview of the AMR, SMR space in the United States, and also your perspective on the broader range of potential value applications.
Kristy, thank you very much. And I gotta say, it's very exciting to watch what's been happening here in Glasgow with COP, and I think really the embrace of nuclear technologies. I go back to my times first starting in Washington in the late 1980s. And it was very difficult to get members of Congress and even the administration at that point behind nuclear. That has significantly changed today, and a lot of folks may not realize this. Huge bipartisan support, not only in our U.S. Congress, but dating back from President Obama, from President Trump, now President Biden, all have been building one on top of the other in terms of the support for nuclear energy. A lot of kudos to Secretary Granholm, the announcements that she made here this week, former Senator Kerry and his support at a climate change sense. So really a huge movement on the ground. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, Lindsey mentioned that a bit. That's 2 reactor designs. We'll hear a little bit more about that, both TerraPower and X Energy, which are moving forward with specific designs that will be in the ground producing electricity by the end of the decade. Significant increase in appropriations. Every year President Trump sent up an appropriations bill. Every year Congress passed more money for nuclear than was put in it. President Biden has further increased that. And I think that is going to be increased by Congress to supply the types of technologies we need in the Office of Nuclear Energy. Recent authorization bill, massive investment plan by the United States, $7 to $10 billion going forward. And most recently, in the infrastructure bill that went through, we're going to see changes down the road in the tax code. We're going to see changes and further reinforcement of these programs. Really important investment in U.S. nuclear technologies. But it's not all about U.S. I do a lot of work with our friends in Canada. 65% of the advanced reactors that we're going to be deploying in the United States are also going to be deployed in Canada. So an important initiative between the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to try to have some greater harmonization of their efforts. I think now the announcement of Rolls-Royce, that US, Canada, UK axis can really make an important difference in providing these technologies, not only in our country, but internationally. And finally, I'd layer on top of that, with changes that were made in the last 3 years, not only with the US XM Bank, but also our Development Finance Corporation, we now have the tools from a financial standpoint to export those technologies outside of our country. That's why we heard about that announcement in Romania. Finally, what I would say is it goes beyond just electricity. It's really about energy. These advanced reactors are industrial heat machines. That means we can use them for hydrogen production. We can use them for process heat, replacing many fossil fuels in the production of things like steel, cement, aluminum, and other carbon-intensive activities. I can go on about some of the strategic uses of it, but really the important point to take away from this is the U.S. government is strongly behind these technologies. We have strong relationships we're building with Canada and the UK to make it happen, and it's really diverse in the areas where nuclear can make a difference in carbon reduction.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And one of the key themes that we've been hearing at the COP is also the potential for repowering, retiring or retired coal plant sites, which of course is something that Natrium are intending to do. And with new delivery and deployment models, there's opportunities to really develop that at scale. So that's another example of an important value application. I would just say that one thing that is happening, I think, as we are looking at the advanced technologies, we're looking again at the old technologies. And there was a report that was published today by MIT and Stanford, which actually our consulting firm, Lucid Catalyst, also contributed the analysis for, which looks at the value proposition of keeping Diablo Canyon, which is the last remaining nuclear plant in California, online, and looking at how it could be enormously valuable in the state, not only in keeping carbon emissions down, but actually producing really large amounts of low-cost hydrogen around the $2, $2.5 mark, or indeed desalinating very, very large amounts of water at about half the cost that we would pay otherwise. So, it's interesting to look at this value proposition as it's expanding, and then look ahead to the new technologies and really think about, what we should be doing during this critical decade as these technologies are being demonstrated and commercialized, for siting, licensing, financing, delivery models, to ensure that when these technologies are ready, we're ready to deliver them at scale and at very low cost.
Well, to your point, Kristy, you were talking about Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant in California. I was a former regulator. It is one of the finest nuclear power plants, not only in the U.S., but in the world. Poor public policy really is what was resulting in that plant being shut down. At the same time, other states in our country are embracing it. There's a number of projects being funded by the Department of Energy right now, Palo Verde in Arizona, Xcel Energy in the Midwest, and others, to have hydrogen production, which will really give us one more key to decarbonizing other elements of the economy that we can't right now.
With existing fleet.
With existing fleet.
Any final 60-second remarks? And then I think we're almost out of time. Salma.
Well, no, as I said, I think that there are very excellent opportunities, and there is maybe two sides to this coin. I really think that the nuclear industry has done a lot to get ready to accept this challenge, and I think that even though this is an uphill battle and there is a lot of work that the nuclear industry needs to do, we are getting poised to do it. And at the same time, I would say that this is something that cannot be done only by the nuclear industry, and it is quite energizing to see how governments are seeing that the support, and I don't mean the financial support, I mean the instilling confidence in nuclear and creating the long-term vision that is going to engage and incentivize private investment, not only public investment, is incredibly important. So I think that, I'm excited, and we just need to make sure that we work together. Thanks.
So what would I say, Kristy? I guess I would point out that nuclear is really at an inflection point right now, and this is the industry's real opportunity to showcase how important it is, in fact, essential it is to a net zero future. 20-some years ago, when I started with renewables, we were at 36% non-emitting electricity on the world's grids, and despite trillions of dollars of investment, favorable policy, incentives, we're still, and the massive deployment of renewables, intermittent renewables, we're still at 36% non-emitting electricity on the world's grids, right? We don't have another 20 years to stay status quo. We need to roll out nuclear, both conventional and small modular reactors, and work with and partner with renewables to solve this problem.
But one last thing I'll close with. There are 1 billion people around the world who don't have electricity.
Oh my gosh.
And if we are going to make a real effort to bring real quality lives to those individuals, help them grow their economies in a sustainable, clean way, nuclear power certainly has the ability to be part of the solution.
Well, that can't do better than that. That's a great way to close the session. I'd like to thank you very much, our distinguished panelists, and I'm sure you'll join me in thanking them as well. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for that really inspiring discussion about prospects and progress in this space. We're now going to slightly change our order of operations here because our keynote speaker has been able to join us a little bit early. So I'm very honored to introduce Deputy Secretary of Energy, David Turk. He was previously the Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, working on energy transitions, digitalization of energy systems, and the future of hydrogen in the global energy system. And before that, had a number of roles in the Obama administration at the Department of Energy, Department of State, and National Security Council. So let me just say again, as I said before to Secretary Light, we've been very, very pleased to see the continued very active engagement of the Biden administration on the nuclear portfolio, pushing forward things like the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program and so many other nuclear programs. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you very much for coming, and we really look forward to your remarks.
Well, thanks very much, Rich, and just a huge thanks to ClearPath and Third Way and TerraPraxis as well. I could do two things at this point. One, after a long day, terrific panel, and I'm glad I caught that panel. I can give a shortened version of what I was going to say, and then if there are any questions, I'd love to hear what's on your mind, certainly what this administration can do to help, and have a bit of a discussion. I think we've got about 10 minutes or so, not to belabor things. So I can give the long version or a shorter version and have some interaction. Rich, what do you think?
I think I would vote for the latter.
All right. We'll go with the latter. Just a few maybe high points. I'm sure much of this has been discussed already, not only in this event but other events, and just reference the previous panel as well. I've been going to several COPs. There are some of us who may have gone to even more COPs than myself. I know Andrew's gone to 20 COPs. And we were just talking about it earlier today, and it was just reflected on by the previous panel. Do you beat that, Rich? How many have you been to?
No, only 5.
Only 5, okay. Anybody gone to more than 20? All right. Anyway, those of us who've gone to many COPs over the years, there really has been a sea change, I think. It was referenced by several of the panelists in terms of nuclear's prominence, who's talking about nuclear, the breadth of discussion about nuclear. Not just a few governments, many governments, and certainly NGOs, nonprofits, and of course industrial players as well. And I think one thing that's really changed a lot is as we get the scientific consensus, as we get the scientific news, as we get the IPCC analysis on 1.5 degrees in particular, and real people who care about the climate and care about the planet and want to make differences and changes in the real world, really, no, we can't afford to take technologies off the table. The numbers are incredibly compelling and daunting in terms of the reductions that we need to have in a very, very short amount of time. You look at the US goals, which are in line with the 1.5 degrees, we've got to get to over 50% reductions by 2030, 2035, 100% clean electricity, and by 2050, net zero. 2050, maybe for those who are a little younger here, 2050 sounds like a long way off, but it's really not. That's 28 years. That is not a long time to decarbonize not only power, decarbonize transport, decarbonize buildings. And I think that's sinking in a very useful way. And hopefully it sharpens the pragmatism, sharpens people's willingness to look at a variety of different technologies, because we're going to need a variety of different technologies to be successful. So that's an observation. Again, if people want to question that, that's great as well. Just a few key points. One, existing nuclear. Hopefully our record from this administration has been clear. The recognition existing nuclear is half of our clean energy power right now in the US context. That is a big, big amount. We need to keep that big, big amount. I was talking to Governor Pritzker from Illinois yesterday. They've got nuclear plants that they're looking to extend those lifetimes, including one in Byron that's pretty close to where I grew up, just down the river from there. Happy to go into what we're doing from the administration side of things. We're certainly from the DOE side looking at continued improvement, R&D on the improvement, on the fuels side, on the cost effectiveness side, and very excited about the hydrogen potential, pink hydrogen as it's called, or whatever color you want to attach to it. Some really interesting opportunities on that front that we're certainly exploring from this administration side of things. Secondly, the SMRs, the advanced nuclear. Hopefully our intentions, our record, our funding requests, our historic levels of funding requests for the Nuclear Energy Office is clear. I had a chance to go out to our Idaho National Lab, which is our civilian nuclear lab, and have a chance to meet with some of the colleagues working on the nuclear side of things, and some partnership with NuScale in particular and INL, which is particularly exciting. The advanced demo reactors that we're working on with X Energy and with, this is what you do when you don't read your comments. TerraPower. Is there anyone from TerraPower here? Oh, TerraPower. Very exciting. This is what you can do at the end of the day after a long day at the COP. I hope our record's clear. When I met with the team out in INL, and when we meet with Katie Huff, our NE head, the key thing we keep trying to push is we've got to move. We've got to move quickly. We've got to do the regulatory permitting. We've got to do all of those kinds of things that we need to move as quickly as possible. And I think that will only strengthen the advanced nuclear reactor case. Not easy to do this. These complicated technologies. It's not an easy kind of deal. And then the last point, and just wanted to hit this, is this administration certainly, I think rightfully so, is very much focused on how do the variety of clean energy technologies impact real people, real communities, environmental justice, communities who have not had the good fortunes of some other communities. And we certainly see a role for nuclear in that context as well, both in terms of what we're doing domestically in terms of our strategies and how we think about place-based opportunities for nuclear plants inside old coal plants, some really exciting opportunities on that front. And we also are very pleased to be part of initiatives like the Nice Future Initiative, which has one of the best names, the best acronyms. Who can be against NICE? Who can be against a nice initiative on that side? To really try to focus not only domestically but internationally on nuclear's role in real communities, environmental justice, and empowering communities, and having that be a part of solutions. I think a big part of what we're going to need to do in the U.S. Department of Energy and more generally is with the $800 billion that's been part of the bipartisan infrastructure deal, and then the reconciliation, which I think will pass hopefully very shortly here. That is about $800 billion of additional funding for clean energy, climate-related funding, including on the nuclear side, whether that's tax incentives or demonstration grants or other kinds of acceleration of the advanced demo programs, et cetera, et cetera. That is an awful lot of money, and we're going to need to be successful in working with states and locals and private sector in partnership, not just paper partnership, but real partnership to make that happen. So we're super excited about that. So that's a condensed version of the highlights, what we're trying to do. Again, hopefully what we're trying to do in this administration is clear. More important where our budgets are than what we say, right? You got to follow the money and follow what we're doing from a policy perspective. But certainly in the few minutes, the delta there, if there are any questions, and love to hear any comments about things we can be doing from the U.S. side. Please.
Thank you very much for that support for those regions. One of the things is a recent study that came out that this is by the Nuclear Industry Council of the U.S. 65% of the advanced reactors deployed in the U.S. will also be deployed. One of the areas of potential cooperation between the two countries is the provision of the high-assay, low-enriched uranium necessary to make many of these designs move forward. Is that a potential opportunity for Canada and the U.S. at your level and in our can to work more closely and collaboratively in North America?
So I've had the, please, Rich. Yeah.
Folks that are zooming in.
Yeah.
Feel free to make it shorter.
Happy to do so. The question was on HALEU. Most people paying attention probably know what HALEU is, so I'll just use the acronym, the shortened version. And are there some opportunities between Canada and the U.S. To really think about how we develop that, the resources with the advanced reactors in particular in mind? So several comments. One, there's no country that I've enjoyed working with the most in my various stints in government, whether at the State Department, as Rich was saying, and the Department of Energy or the White House than Canada. And a phenomenal level of bilateral collaboration with Canada. There's now a new Minister of Energy there, Minister Wilkinson, who used to be the Environment Minister, someone that I've had a chance to meet and work with. They've got a phenomenal team at NRCan. And so I think there's all sorts of areas that we can collaborate on that front. HALEU is certainly a topic that we discuss very much at the highest levels in our department and with other White House and interagency colleagues. Katie Huff, of course, our acting Assistant Secretary for Nuclear, is very much focused on that and trying to think through. And I've had meetings with a lot of different companies and others, including former deputy secretaries who are interested in this issue and working on this issue as well. So happy to see on what in particular that we could do. And if you have some specific suggestions, love to work through those. Yep. Yeah, please.
Say, you know, the U.S. and Canada and the U.K., we're going to be able to develop and deploy these small modular reactors in our nations, and there is some good collaboration, especially between the U.S. and Canada, going on in terms of harmonizing the regulatory framework. But if we're to reach some of those goals, objectives that we've discussed, whether it's environmental justice or international development or helping nations around the world decarbonize with small modular reactors, we're going to have to get harmonized recognition for these technologies. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, happy to do so. And we're very fortunate not only to have here tonight, but to have more broadly leading our international office. And Rich already gave a nice shout out to my colleague Andrew Light, who's just a terrific leader for us internationally. And this is an administration and Department of Energy who has a very proactive, robust international strategy and trying to be thinking what we need in the years ahead along those lines. So I've had good conversations with the head of the NRC. I think there's a lot of things that we can do. And the imperative is there, as I said, if you care about climate and you think that climate is something that needs to be focused on, I think all of us in this room and hopefully virtually as well feel that. We look at the science, we need to move very quickly. So if there are ways that we can work with international partners to try to streamline and make sure that we can have some of our, especially reactors that are produced in the US context, have a life elsewhere and have an ability to scale up quickly elsewhere, then we're happy to explore it. We've got the NICE initiative, we've got other bilateral collaborations. Andrew spends a certain percentage of his own personal time so far on the nuclear front, doing some terrific nuclear diplomacy. The Secretary, myself, others of us as well. So happy to get in particulars and figure out other ways we can. And that's what I told the team when I was at INL and Katie Huff at NE. How can we speed things up? How can we make sure that we get nuclear, including advanced nuclear reactors, as quickly as we can, obviously safely, and we have to do all the other kinds of pieces along those lines. But we just can't wait. We've got a secretary, very fortunately, at the Department of Energy. She literally counts down the number of days we've got, and in this term, she keeps it on a whiteboard in her office. And like every day that we're not moving forward and really pushing the envelope to do things as quickly as we can. So happy to get into particulars of that and figure out what's possible on that front. Yep. All right, any other questions or comments or criticism? I'm always open to criticism too. We don't want to all be in an echo chamber. So if there's things we can be doing, if there's things we're doing that don't make sense, let us know. If there's things we're doing that can accelerate things, yeah, please.
So, Mr. we talked about the big change in COP this year. What can you do, thinking about the next COP, what can you do to further increase the impact and recognition of value?
Well, one thing that's really pleasing, I have to say, for someone who's been to many COPs, not 20 COPs like Andrew, but many COPs, is the COPs have really shifted from a negotiation first and everything else sort of over here to really the exact opposite. At least that's what I see. I think most of the energy, the excitement are on the ambition that countries are bringing to the table, the commitments that companies are making, and real world discussions like this one we're having right now. And I don't see that trend going any differently. And should go in the direction of having those real world conversations. We're at the point, we know where the science is. We've got a goal that we've set ourselves at the Paris Agreement. Hopefully we'll make some progress on transparency in the Article 6, and we've got the rule book in place. And then the game is implementation. The game is actually doing things in the real world. And so hopefully COPs will be more and more in that kind of vein. Certainly when we chair the SEM and Mission Innovation ministerial meetings in September, that's what we'll be focusing on, is real world implementation. We're also chairing the IEA ministerial this year, where nuclear is getting a renewed focus. I worked at IEA, and what Fatih and team have done to really highlight nuclear's importance, the existing nuclear, and then the new nuclear, I think, has been revolutionary in the IEA context. So the more that real world issues are discussed, the imperative to actually do things at scale, all the advantages that nuclear can bring to the table, I think the more nuclear will be a fundamental part of the discussion. And I think incumbent on every one of us to try to move quickly, to try to roll it out, to show, to prove the concept, right? Success breeds success on that front. And the more we can have success, whether it's existing nuclear being used for pink hydrogen, whether it's new nuclear moving as quickly as we can and hitting those points ahead of schedule if possible, ahead of budget, all those kinds of things, the better off. And I do think nuclear is a perfect example. When I met the team out at INL and the NE team, public-private working together, the advanced demo programs, TerraPower, X-Energy, et cetera, are perfect examples, I think, of that more, I don't know if I'm allowed to say industrial strategy, but an industrial strategy in the US context. All right, any other last words from anybody? Yeah, please.
Appreciation of the industry for the strong support of the Biden administration. So in your comments, you mentioned this term which people always laugh when they say it, pink hydrogen.
Yep.
So I want to ask a kind of intellectual question and kind of get your thoughts about this. So we continue to differentiate in a very clear way nuclear, which is a zero greenhouse gas emitting source of energy, and renewables, wind and solar, production tax credits, other things. Do you think that there is really a purpose for us to continue to kind of differentiate these taxonomies, and is there a way that we should just be thinking about zero greenhouse gas emitting energies all get an equal treatment in order to make them all compete and drive the most efficient solution?
Well, and Chairman Wyden is trying to do that with the way he's doing his tax incentives in the Senate Finance Committee, right, and trying to break down, the varying buckets, et cetera. From my end, the way I look at it, and again, I hope more and more people are looking at it with the urgency of the climate science, is energy is a good thing, emissions are a bad thing, and where do you get the big emission reductions, and how do you make sure you've got affordable, reliable, resilient energy? And I think people are very much focused not just on the affordability, but the resilient and the reliable energy, whether it's a cybersecurity front, whether it's making sure you've got baseload power and storage and flexibility of the grids. And I only see that increasing over time. So the attributes that can provide that should be ideally in a very pragmatic kind of colorblind way. We can just talk about hydrogen, clean hydrogen, instead of the colors of hydrogen along those lines. Whether we fully get our tax codes and other kinds of systems to be fully technology agnostic in that way, certainly if your climate is the driver and have to maintain the affordability, resilience, and reliability, you're just after those attributes. And again, you need to do the life cycle analysis. You need to take a look at all parts of the equation. We need to do a number of issues on that, including on the nuclear storage side of things with existing nuclear as well. So we've just got to look at it in a very ambitiously pragmatic, colorblind way, if you want to think of it that way. Whether we'll get there tomorrow or next week or 2 weeks or 2 months from now, this is Congress, this is democracy. Different members have different, particular technologies they favor, et cetera, et cetera. But I think more and more people are feeling both ambitious and real world, and that's what we need. Good.
Please join me in thanking Secretary Turk.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you. Yeah, happy to come over.
Folks on the line, hold with us just a moment. We're preparing for our final segment. Fireside chat with no fire. I think as we're running a little late, we'll just go ahead and get started. I have the great pleasure, as we finish our conversation here, to introduce Dave Scott. Dave Scott is the director of ENIC in the United Arab Emirates. He is one of the architects of one of the most exciting new nuclear projects globally, the Baraka plant. He also has roles as a director of TerraPower and General Atomic and a number of other ventures in the clean energy and I just learned in the low carbon agriculture space as well. And so, Dave, why don't you come up to the front?
Thanks, Rich.
All right. Okay, we're going to do this. All right, well, I'm going to start with the obvious question. How did somebody who used to work in the White House in the United States and then for in the hydrocarbon space end up architecting the advanced nuclear policy of the United Arab Emirates?
Yeah, well, yeah, so maybe as a kind of background, so I'm one of those individuals, I'm an economist by training, and I realized at about the age 40 I should have been a nuclear physicist, so it was a late coming realization. But my involvement in the nuclear industry actually started as a result of a project that was technology agnostic, looking at how to improve the reliability and the economics of the energy system in the UAE. And it comes back to 2006. In 2006 in the UAE, they began to become aware of the fact that they would not have enough domestically produced natural gas to meet their energy demand in the future. And so as part of the response to that, they engaged me and a number of others, a team that we formed, to evaluate different options for meeting future energy demand. And we had this very agnostic approach. We looked at every form of energy, everything from renewables all the way to hydrocarbon-based systems, and nuclear was part of that analysis. And as we conducted the analysis more and more, we came to the realization that nuclear represented a value proposition that was just very compelling. And even back then, which now it's prophetic, but we were quite concerned about carbon intensity. And that kind of drove us in that direction. So we sort of launched this nuclear program, initially based on a kind of feasibility study, and then ultimately on an implementation plan. And that's how I got involved in this. And now 15 years later, I have 15 years of nuclear experience. When I started this, I was, of course, an economist with no nuclear background. But it's been a kind of unique kind of experience because we've built a program from scratch. And I'll tell you, when you start something with a blank white page, it really causes you to reassess and re-examine all of the assumptions and all of the ways things have been done in going concerns or programs. And that experience has really been meaningful, and which I think has made me a little bit more influential in the industry and somebody who people are interested in talking to like this.
Well, I have to say, having now had the pleasure of visiting Baraka twice, it is a truly extraordinary facility to see 4 reactor domes sort of rising in the desert in the western half of the country, to see, visiting the rooms, to see young female Emirati nuclear operators, at that point preparing to take control of the helm of the reactors, which probably is perhaps a bit of a record scratch in the region, I would think, and very inspiring, I think, as well. Can you say a little bit more about that, about the plant and the project?
Yeah, indeed. So as you mentioned, it's a 4-unit plant. I think in terms of total output, it's the largest single deployment of nuclear power at a time. It's based on the Korean APR 1400 design, about 5,600 megawatts of electric output. We have 2 units that are complete and in operations, Unit 1 and Unit 2, and we have 2 units that are completing construction now. They're at respectively about 98 and 95% completion. When they're done, they will amount to about 25% of the national energy requirement of the UAE, and they'll also, depending on whether you calculate based on substitution against natural gas or crude oil, will abate about 21 to 32 million tons of carbon. I think that's actually interesting to look at. Recently we've seen these announcements, and by the way, I really want to support
the announcement in Iceland of the Orca project, now the largest carbon capture project out there. But to just put in context, the abated carbon from the Baraka project is somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 times the carbon of the Orca project on an annual basis. So nuclear has a big role in decarbonization, and I think this project has that as well. The other thing I'll say real quick about the project is, one of the reasons the project's been successful is that it started as an energy project, not a nuclear project, which caused us to be very practical about how we pursued it.
So thinking about that experience, obviously the Emirates have a few unique attributes. One of them is that there's a sovereign wealth fund with $1 million in it for every citizen of the of the Emirates. So what is transferable from that experience to, say, the countries in the developing world? And in the course of this discussion, we've heard quite a bit about the need to electrify billions of folks rising out of poverty elsewhere. Obviously, the Emirates is very much on the other end of that spectrum. What's repeatable elsewhere in the world, in other countries that perhaps don't have that extraordinary scale of resources?
Yeah, so I think there's a common perception that wealth has been kind of the key to the program, but actually, if you look at the economics of the UAE program, it's been quite modest in terms of cost. I mean, while I'm precluded from talking about specific costs per kilowatt installed, I can say it's quite modest. And maybe a way that I can get that economics is to kind of say, we'll be generating electricity from these plants on sort of day one at a sort of $7 to $9 MMBTU comparison, if you were thinking about a natural gas plant that you're displacing. And so that's quite economic. And I think it underlies this point that you don't need fabulous wealth, right? You actually, for many countries, this would be a solution that would be better than other solutions that they're deploying. And the other thing I would say is the UAE, while on a per capita basis quite wealthy, the size of its economy relative to the economies of many nations that are looking at nuclear power, for instance, Eastern European nations, is quite small. And nuclear programs are national programs. And so when you have a small country with a large per capita economy, or a larger country with a smaller per capita, but the overall economy size is similar, the cost of bearing the program is in some ways similar. So I think it's very repeatable in that regard. The other thing I would say about the Emirati program is that they started out with a real paucity of talent. There was when the program launched, there was only one UAE national nuclear engineer in the world, Ambassador Hamid Al-Kabi, the permanent representative to the IAEA. And now, of course, they have large numbers, hundreds of nuclear trained engineers, and they've also relied on international talent to assist them in the program. But I think that they had their own unique challenges to overcome. Every country will have its unique challenges to overcome, but with good planning, I think that you can overcome those, whether it's financial or human capital related.
I think one of the things I've always found most interesting about the project is the degree to which it really was a global partnership. So as you mentioned, these are Korean reactors, Koreans leading the construction, but as you also mentioned, significant talent brought in from around the world, including the US, a huge partnership on training these engineers. Another piece of the partnership, which I think is sometimes discussed less, is the financing assistance that went into that project and sort of the role of, including U.S. export credit that it went into it. I wonder if you could say a bit about the role, for example, that the U.S. Export-Import Bank played in the project.
Yeah, so I think it's also, as you said, the basic technology is Korean technology, but for instance, the MMIS system and other components with value well over $1 billion came from the United States in terms of the program, and that allowed us to get access to credit from US EXIM, and we had discussions about that. Ultimately, we probably didn't project finance as much as we could have, but we did project finance about $13 billion worth of the project. Which obviously improves the overall economics and the long-term economic performance for the owners of the project. But indeed, as you say, there have been contributions, both hardware, human capital, software from the United States, from Korea, from many locations, and including now with fuel fabrication and EUP supply from France and Russia as well. So it is a very international project.
So you've now actually gone critical on 2 of the reactors, 2 more to come in the coming years. What's next for the Emirates and nuclear? I know you were also an advisor for TerraPower, one of the advanced reactor companies. I wonder if you can discuss a little bit how you see this continuing to develop both in UAE and perhaps more broadly in the region. What's the role for advanced reactors there?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when you think about that. Now, the UAE will make it's a sovereign nation. It'll make choices about its energy mix going forward based on the same kind of practicality that drove it to build the first nuclear plants. But the launch of the nuclear program was really about developing optionality, right? So, and it's not accidental that at the same time that the nuclear program was being launched, also their big renewable energy tilt, the formation of Masdar and all of that was also happening. Going back to that sort of energy study that we started in 2007 that underpins many of these activities, really the idea was to create more optionality so that they could have access to all of the technologies and that they could then deploy those technologies based on what happened in the market and what happened in terms of the advancement of technologies. So the Emirates will have the capability, now having deployed a relatively large initial fleet and developing all of the programmatic elements, an independent regulator with technical capability, university programs that turn out sufficient numbers of nuclear-trained engineers to embrace future technologies. And of course, their decision of when and what to embrace will be driven by practical factors of what's the best technology to fit the requirements of their grid and that best reflect the requirements economically for them as well. So I think there's that option, right, which they wouldn't have had if they hadn't launched the program. And I think they're coming to, having developed the option now, they're really at a place now where they can take full advantage of it as they consider, deep decarbonization. They've announced a net zero target in the UAE, and now they have all the tools available on the renewable side, on the nuclear side, and hybrid versions of conventional power as well.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about all this in the context of that net zero target. UAE is an incredible country in that, I mean, there is a significant domestic shipbuilding industry. There are two, global class airlines that operate from there. Obviously, an enormous traditional kind of hydrocarbon industry that perhaps could benefit from low carbon heat. I wonder if you could just kind of walk us through to what extent nuclear and all the other attributes of nuclear, either as a low carbon heat provider or a zero carbon fuel fabrication facility, to what extent is it being viewed in the broader economic decarbonization?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because when the nuclear program was launched in earnest, kind of, let's call it 2009, it's probably fair to say that the national oil company and the major industrial entities in the country weren't really watching it as something other than just a source of electricity that would come through the grid as any other source of electricity. But now with the renewed focus on deep decarbonization and the need to decarbonize the production process for exports, it has become an issue of great interest. And you actually now have the national oil company, some of the big industrial output organizations like Emirates Global Aluminum and others who are actually looking at this. And the UAE has done something quite interesting. In Abu Dhabi in particular, the Department of Energy in Abu Dhabi, which is the utility regulator, has issued a position paper that they will start providing clean energy certificates, not just renewable clean energy certificates, but also nuclear clean energy certificates for both voluntary and regulatory requirements that can then be purchased by industrial producers and by businesses or others. And that's really, I have to say, has tremendous interest. It's really, lots of parties are looking at that and trying to figure out how to get access to those going forward. And I think that's another place where other countries could really think about this. And we heard Deputy Secretary Turk a moment ago talk about the world's not quite there intellectually to treat all forms of zero greenhouse gas energy equally. But this is, I think, one of the frontiers that, if we changed it, could really help the deployment of nuclear power as well, getting it equal treatment as it relates to clean energy certificates and acceptance of nuclear as an input to decarbonized products, so that they don't in the future face some kind of a carbon-related tariff or other kind of penalty related to what we normally see with traditional forms of energy production.
So I have been monopolizing your time and thinking in the conversation. Are there questions? I have more questions for you, but are there any questions from the audience that folks would like? Mr. Merrifield.
Yeah, so the question was, there were some investments made early in the project to increase the capacity. So the project has 4 units today, but it was actually designed with intake and outtake cooling capacity for up to 8 units. And that's really kind of focuses on the long-term approach that was taken. we did an assessment early on when we were doing the facilities for the initial 4 units, and we said, look, if we later wanted to expand and build additional nuclear in the future, we have 2 choices: to dig up everything that we did to begin with, or to just do it now. And the value delta was very significant, and we decided to make that investment and create more capacity so that expansion could be done at a lower cost in the future. And I think now, seeing what's happening in the world, and like I said, the enthusiasm for zero greenhouse gas emitting power in the industry in the UAE, I think there's a very high likelihood that we'll see that those investments turn out to have been a good bet.
When you think about the wave of new announcements of nuclear projects that we've seen now over the past year, the sort of the recommitment in France, the announcements just today, as was discussed before, here in the UK, Japan's recommitment to nuclear following its net zero announcement. There's really been this wave around the world. What about the region? I mean, do you see the broader sort of EMEA region also exploring this as well?
Yeah, I do. And let me just comment a little bit on that wave of new announcements. I think, and I'm actually glad as a kind of technology agnostic energy practitioner, people are finally getting serious about what it means to do deep decarbonization of their energy systems and their utility grids as well. And I think that there has been a lot of discussion around decarbonization in past years, but it's been a lot of window dressing because people have not been dealing with the real challenges of dispatchability, of daily load demand variation, and also seasonal load demand variation. And now, as people are getting really serious and they're actually thinking in the future, large markets might penalize us if we haven't decarbonized our energy system, they're really looking seriously, maybe for the first time, at what will really be required. And it tends to drive everybody to nuclear power. So to your question about the region, as regional players, of course, will experience these same kind of sort of threats to their economies, the possibility that they could face some kind of penalty on their exports, into major markets. They will, I think, come to the same view that nuclear is an indispensable part of any really feasible solution. And as a result, I think you'll see an increased interest. There is some interest already. You've seen Egypt and Saudi Arabia, I think, as countries that are very likely to deploy nuclear power. But I think that they won't be the last countries in the region to deploy peaceful nuclear energy.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, so it really gets to, so I frequently, when I talk about the program.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry. So the question is, what was the regulatory status in the UAE when the program was launched? Did they have a nuclear regulatory capability, or did they have to develop it? In reality, they did not have a nuclear regulator at the time. And this goes right to the core of like a recommendation that I frequently make, talking about new entrants to the nuclear industry and countries that are considering doing it. One of the suggestions that I make is that you should fund the regulator first. Before you fund the promotional activities, or your NEPIO, as the IAE would call it, your organization to deploy nuclear power, you should fund the regulator. And in our case, we launched them both at the same time, and it turned out to work out for us, but there was a certain element of luck there. If the regulator, which was fully independent, had come to views about the design of the reactor that we were deploying that were different than the requirements that we had procured for, we would have seen a significant cost and schedule impact from that. Ultimately, they supported the design that we purchased of their own volition and established a view that it was a safe design and could be licensed in the country. But we could have retired that risk completely if we'd, for instance, funded them with maybe $30 million and started them on their regulatory activities a year or 18 months in advance of the other activities. So that's like one of the lessons learned from our program is fund the regulator first, right? That's a really important element of making a successful program.
I'm going to ask one last question in that vein, violating my own rule, moderator's prerogative. You were also deeply involved in the initial 123 agreement between the U.S. and UAE, and I think UAE took a very different and interesting approach to that. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how you set that up initially.
Yeah, so I know that this is a somewhat controversial element for certain countries. The UAE's commitment not to engage in any reprocessing or any enrichment. But as a practical matter, this wasn't a political concession. Sometimes it's billed as that the 123 agreement extracted this from the Emiratis. It was a sovereign decision on their part. And quite frankly, the analysis was very easy. We looked at the program when we were designing it, what would be the elements that would be required, and looked at the requirements for the fuel cycle. And essentially came to the view that if you had to develop your own fuel cycle, you probably add something like 15 to 30 years requirement to the schedule to deploy your first reactor. And that kind of economics just doesn't make any sense. The other thing I'd say is internationally, there has never been a civil nuclear power plant that has ceased operation because it didn't have access to nuclear fuel. And so for many countries that are considering embracing a new nuclear program, to worry too much about fuel security and the security of enrichment supply is, I think, to be too conservative. And in reality, I think that the international fuel market and the EUP market is very well established. It has a very good track record, and countries can take a faster path to embracing nuclear power by essentially, choosing to go to that international market and take advantage of the existing infrastructure that is there. So that was the driver of the decision. It ultimately was also very politically convenient to point out the sort of non-proliferation credentials that this made possible for the UAE program, but sometimes that sort of chicken and egg solution is put backwards. It really was a practical decision, which then ultimately supported a political narrative that was helpful to the reputation of the program and I think beneficial to the industry as a whole.
Thank you so much, David, for a really fascinating discussion and for everything that you're doing to advance nuclear in the region and globally.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Rich. Great to be here. Thank you.
With that, for everyone zooming in, we're going to finish our programming for this evening. I really want to thank everyone who's joined us for this discussion, both live here in Glasgow and virtually from the East and West Coast in the US in particular, and really want to thank all of our presenters and discussants who came and joined us this evening. So let's have one last round of applause for our presenters, and with that, we can go and for the folks that are here, can enjoy some refreshments. Thanks.